Trying to figure out likely outcomes, and it's very difficult because obviously Putin is unpredictable. Everybody understands that. I'm going to make a speculation about Putin at this point because usually if you go back in other disputes over time, there's been a conflict between the Soviet Union, then Russia and Ukraine for a long time. It's a non-NATO buffer state, and it's been well known a long time that Putin wanted to take control of it, annex it essentially. And I think the assumption was, as he was building up his troops, that he would roll in there, would not get a lot of resistance, and then the world would just go on with its business, and he would probably not attempt to cross into any NATO states. It's not what happened, obviously, but there's one singular occurrence that I want you to think about in the context of likely outcomes, the way I'm thinking about it. For hundreds of years, the Swiss have remained essentially that, the Swiss. Even during the Second World War, war criminals, despots, all kinds of different leaders from around the world that were dictators or whomever, strongmen, you name it, were able to keep their wealth under the streets of Zurich, and they had access to it, liquid access to it, always. And, the Swiss were criticized for this quite a bit, particularly during conflicts like the Second World War, etc. But they remained the Swiss. They never sequestered or closed those down or restricted access to this capital, regardless who you were. For the first time in modern times, last week, they actually shut down the accounts of Russian oligarchs.
Wow.
Now, that has never happened before. And the reason I want you to think a little bit about this is probably, and I'm speculating like anybody else because the Swiss aren't going to disclose this, my guess is there's probably about 2,500 families that are oligarchs that were made wealthy through the transition of the communist regime to private when they're granted for free copper mines and oil fields and gas fields and everything else. But there's also all the generals, the people that are in the military that have attained wealth through nefarious means. They put it all in Zurich. That's where it is, because they knew with certainty that no matter what happened, no matter what Putin did, they'd still have their family's wealth secured there in Swiss francs. Well, that's not what happened. Basically, last week, the Swiss shut it all down. They shut down their cash cards, shut down their credit cards, gave them no access to it. Now, this is serious. I know they're taking away their yachts and everything else,
right,
but that does not compare to what it's like to shut down an entire family's access to wealth. And that's what's occurring here. My guess, the outcome of this is Putin is going to have a hunting accident. That's what's going to happen, because he has basically turned aside all of the support he has internally. And those people don't want to, after having all these years of wealth, lose it like that, or at least never have access to it again. Some way, somehow, he'll probably drink radioactive tea, which he's been accused of doing to many other people that were his competitors or political enemies. Or he likes to go hunting. I believe this is the beginning of the end of his political, career. It's over. He has isolated himself from everybody. And that was okay if it was just the rest of the world, but he's isolated himself from his own generals and the oligarchs, and that they're not going to forgive him for. I think his time is short. I think either path ends up with him out of power, because within about 11 or 12 months, the full weight of the sanctions is going to put Russia into a brutal recession, and people will not even have access to electronics, entertainment, access to any other SWIFT systems, ACH transfers of capital. They have to use a Chinese-based system. It's going to be really nasty in there. And when you put that much suffering on a people in a very short period of time, they tend not to like it. And you don't have that base. Right now, he's actually quite popular in Russia, but they haven't had any of the sanctions weighed on them yet. It's coming to a theater near you, or more likely no theater near you. They're not even going to give you Disney cartoons. So the rest of the world has basically shut them off. So that would be, within 12 months, I think, riots in the streets, etc. When he starts shooting his own population, in addition to shooting the Ukrainians, I think that gets nasty. There's lots of precedents for this in modern times. Look at Mussolini's. He ended up upside down dead in the town square. That's the kind of thing I think Putin's on his way to. Or the shorter pathway is, you just find some military leader that says, well, I think this guy's unstable. He may be suffering from a disease we don't know about. He may have long COVID. It's really hard to understand these irrational decisions. And then the hunting accident scenario. But I'm pretty sure that Mr. Putin is not a long-term player. And if he is, he'll end up in jail in The Hague for war crimes. You got to remember, all these generals, they're also on their way to The Hague. That's the thing about the International Tribunal. When you become a war criminal, they don't care how long it takes. You end up at the end of your life in a cell. And that's where a lot of these generals are going. And this time they'll have no cash with them. So I think it's going to be a really brutal outcome, just brutal. I actually think it's a loss for Russia, because I think that just hardens the resolve of the Ukrainian people, those that remain to fight. There's a tremendous amount of munitions coming into the country now in the form of high-tech Stingers, anti-tank missiles, ground ordnance, maybe aircraft. We don't know that yet. But what will be occurring if they do assassinate him, that there'll be another leader put in place. Obviously, NATO is communicating with him daily. You can see that. It's one of the remarkable things about the social media tracking this. And the resolve will be hardened. And then all of a sudden, young Russian soldiers will be shot in the streets, their tanks blown up, their trucks blown up one at a time. It'll be a really nasty, grueling guerrilla warfare. And generally, if you look over time, the motivation of people that want to be free is significantly stronger than conscripted Russian soldiers that are in their 20s. And this has been well documented by many networks. A lot of them were sent in there under false pretenses and are writing back to their parents saying, I don't know what I'm doing here, but I'm killing babies and I'm not okay with it. And so you have a lot of that to come. And I think, again, it leads to the fact that the more of these atrocities occur and the more they come out to the rest of the free world on a daily basis, it's just setting up for the liability of criminal war crimes. And the number of people that are going to be involved in that. If you're a general right now reporting to Putin, you're not feeling too good. You don't have any money, and you're on your way to a jail cell eventually. He has a point. I mean, communicating the truth, which eventually gets out. I mean, he'll provide, and over time, these Starlink connections will find their way into Russia. Russia actually is quite a high-tech community of coders and software developers that are very sophisticated. That's one of the reasons they have cyber war as one of their weapons, because they're very good at this. That truth will eventually make it into Russia, one way or the other, through downloads. So the rest of the world is seeing all this. Russians are going to eventually see it, but in the meantime, they're going to start to be deprived of all the things that they've enjoyed for the last 10 years as the West just cuts them off to all of these supplies of financial services and goods and services. So they're going to start to figure out that they're getting isolated, not going to be very happy, and again puts more pressure on Putin. It's really hard to understand the upside endgame for Putin, which is why many people, including me, speculate he's ill. Every day that possibility is lessened because of the number of civilians being basically murdered. It's hard to see a scenario where the rest of the world negotiates a peaceful outcome with Putin in leadership.